Before we get started, I actually see that we have an honored guest here this morning. Is it okay if I draw attention to you, Hans? Too late. Yeah. Okay. I don't know if you guys remember, Hans Lundberg was out here working last winter, maybe in January? January of 25? Yep. And he visited Trinity while he was out here and was baptized at Free Grace Baptist Church in Chilliwack, about a month ago? 3 weeks? Okay, so welcome back for a visit, Hans. Welcome here. Okay, we are on chapter 26 in section 6 here this morning. So you can turn in your confessions there. I'll give you a second there, and we will work through that. We completely finished section 5 last week here, so we will pick up there. And this is again on the nature of the church. So chapter 26, section 6. The members of these churches are saints by calling, visibly displaying and demonstrating in and by their profession and life their obedience to the call of Christ. They willingly agree to live together according to Christ's instructions, giving themselves to the Lord and to one another by the will of God, with the stated purpose of following the ordinances of the gospel. And so again, as we've been working through this chapter, we've had a definition of what the church is, who the church is comprised of, and now we have moving into a picture of what the church does. How does it function? And so we can break this in pieces here again, up to note 12, and I'll assign those passages before we get started. Who wants to take Romans 1 verse 7? Who can take that? Howard's got that. Okay, and then 1 Corinthians 1 verse 2. Who wants that? Harry's got that. Okay, so we'll read up to there and then we'll read those supporting texts. Okay, so the members of these churches are saints by calling, visibly displaying and demonstrating in and by their profession and life their obedience to the call of Christ. And then go ahead, Howard and Harry.
To all those in Rome who are loved by God and called to be saints, grace to you and peace from God, our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ.
Okay, so there in Paul's greeting to the Romans, it is addressed specifically to those who are loved by God and called to be saints. So if you are a member of a church, you are called to be a saint. You are obligated to be a saint. And of course, if you are a true believer, you actually are a saint. But then our calling as Christians is to live according to what God has declared us to be. So it is an ugly mark on the Christian church when the members of the church conduct themselves in ungodly manner. Okay, which is one of the reasons why we have instructions about church discipline and accountability and so forth among the members of a church, is because that is what the church is designed to do. If someone from a church is visibly, publicly sinning and not repenting, that reflects poorly on all the members. And that's something for us to keep in mind. If you are, flirting with a coworker, if you are drinking too much, if your mouth is out of control apart from church, look around you, because you are doing that on behalf of everybody here. Okay? You are sucking everybody else into your foolishness. Okay? This is a sober thing. It's not just you having one too many on Friday night. Everybody in this room is taking on the shame of your foolishness, and it really is a shame. So this is it's a noble calling, it's a wonderful calling, but we need to keep in mind how our actions reflect on the wider body of Christians generally, but then specifically on our own local church. And if a church won't deal with those things, then of course you can expect the problem to get worse, not better. But the calling here is to be saints. We're loved by God, we are called to be saints, and our actions need to reflect that, as well as the unity and the love that happens inside of the church. Howard, well, no, you had that. Harry had 1 Corinthians 1 verse 2, sorry.
To the church of God which is in Corinth,
So again, similar address. So the church is those who are being sanctified, which is to be made holy, right? Justification means we are declared holy, and that is done entirely by God's grace, apart from any reference to the way we behave ourselves. Justification is a legal declaration. Sanctification is the lifelong process of our behavior catching up to our legal declarations. So those who are becoming holy in their conduct are those who are being sanctified, called to be saints together with all those who in every place call upon the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, both their Lord and ours. Okay, so can you see what Harry just read? It's the same principle. So now your sinful actions don't just reflect on your local church, they do, but they reflect on Christians. Okay? Oh, Christians are those people that say one thing and do another. Christians are the people that, enter into inappropriate flirting relationships. Christians generally do this, that, or the other thing. So again, as a Christian, you are representing Christ, and you are representing Christ's body everywhere you go. And you are either giving him a good name or you are giving him a poor name. Okay? Your actions always reflect the broader fellowship of the saints. And this is, of course, one of the logical pieces of having a regenerate-only church membership, or having a believers-only church, as is outlined in this confession here. But I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to throw that back and ask to what degree we see that our actions reflect on the broader Christian community, whether that's the local church or Christians generally. Do we tend to think in those terms? Is that a popular way of thinking? To get the conversation going, I don't think it's a popular way of thinking at all. Okay. Oh, good. Sorry. I see that hand.
No, it's definitely not popular. Part of it is our individual salvation, which is obviously biblical. But they completely ignore the corporate life of the church, of God's family, of the world, covenant, of the world, of a country or nation. And I would say not only do we not see it reflected in the church, but the consequences of it is why the state of the country is the way it is today. And just like King Charles just now said he's no longer the protector of the faith, that he's the protector of all religions in England, that is cause for removal for Christian people, including by the Magna Carta. That is cause for removal. Unfortunately, the people aren't the people that would have the authority to remove them, because they themselves have no longer done that. Live in a corporate Christian community the way the Bible instructs, the way the church instructs, and so we see the consequences play out on the world, not just in the church, not just on our lives, not just in our families, but formerly Christian nations that have forgotten this and become very individualized. It's been a disaster, and it's led to all of this.
Yeah. So Dave is affirming that corporate nature of the faith and then expanding it outward. And I agree. If you saw in the news this week, King Charles made his reign completely illegitimate this week because he broke his coronation vows. He made a vow in front of the entire realm, which includes everybody here. If you're a Canadian citizen, he's your king. He put his hand on a Bible and said he would protect and advance the Reformed faith. And he would advance the spread of the gospel and the laws of God throughout his entire realm. And he broke those vows this week by saying he would now become a defender of a multi-faith nation. He's an illegitimate monarch at this point. He has dethroned himself. Of course, no one cares enough because we're all watching football and just having a good time. So nobody actually cares. But in a sane age, we would say, you're done. You've broken your vows. You are no longer a suitable ruler. And unfortunately, the Church of England is going to say nothing, because the Church of England is itself basically a pagan multicultural church that celebrates Islam and all this other foolishness as well. But that's a bigger example, true. And we could also shrink it down smaller than the church and say our family, right? How many times does a father kind of tell his son, especially in the more classical world, I gave you this name, son, use it appropriately, right? And that's a biblical way of thinking. Don't squander the last name that you got, because that reflects on your father, it reflects on your grandfathers. Don't do that. Be a man. Take your responsibilities to the broader community seriously. Yeah, Keith. Right, so Keith is pointing out some people outside the church understand this concept better than people inside the church, right? I always remember one very vivid conversation I had with a man who was correctly excommunicated for unrepentant adultery. And his biggest complaint with the church in that discipline was how hypocritical the church is. Well, you can't complain both ways. Either the church is hypocritical and you get to stay, or the church puts you out because it's trying to work against hypocrisy. You can't have it both ways, but seemingly we want it both ways. But this is a rationale behind church discipline, actually. If you give a bad name to the people of God, you have disciplined yourself. And at a certain point, the church just needs to recognize that you have put yourself outside of the people of God, at least in your conduct. And then the goal, of course, is restorative. But the rationale is simple. We are called to be saints. If you are a Christian, you are called to be a saint. And if you are, it was Martin Lloyd-Jones who said that we need to get back to this concept, and I agree with him. We need to get back to this concept that sees that the greatest honor any man could ever be bestowed is to be the member of a church. Okay? Because that means a group of believers has collectively understood that your profession of faith is credible and they have received you into membership. And again, to give the rationale, why do we have elder interviews with people ahead of membership? Why do people share their testimony publicly in Sunday school? Why do we give a 2-week period before accepting them into membership? That's because it is every single member's job to help enforce the fact that we are called to be saints. And if somebody knows some dark secret sin that isn't out in the open, the point isn't to shout it from the housetop, but that 2-week period is to say, you know what, there's something that needs to be followed up, or I'm not sure this person is actually saved, or that kind of thing. But this is the work of the whole membership of the church, that not just anybody can just say, well, I'm running for mayor of Niverville, so I'd like to be part of a church. Can I join yours? Because it'll help me with my with my mayoral career. That's a no, right? That process of accepting people into church membership really is a test, as best as we humanly and fallibly and imperfectly can, is a test to see if someone's profession is credible, if they're walking the talk, and on that basis can be made members of a church. And I think Dr. Lloyd-Jones was correct. That is the greatest honor you can be bestowed, is that a company of God's people have said, yes, you are truly regenerate as best as we can tell, and you are a legitimate member of a church. But, again, we've come off of probably 2 generations now at this point of me and Jesus got my own thing going. Me and Jesus got it all worked out. Okay? Ain't no preacher man tell me what it's all about, right? And of course, the wonderful, I come to the garden alone. I come to the garden alone. And he walks with me and he talks with me. And no one in the history of humanity has ever known this before me, right? See, that pietism has destroyed largely a biblical conception of the corporate people of God and the saintly nature of the church. This is not a rugged, individualistic thing. This is the corporate people of God, the gathered people of God. Vern. Well, and so Vern is correct. So what is the church on this side of eternity? The church is really preparation for the new heavens and the new earth, right? And that's the logic, let's say, in a book like Hebrews, where we're working through right now. Every time the Lord's Day that the saints gather, that is preparation. Heaven and earth are joined together. The great cloud of witnesses descends here. They're with us. Or the other languages, we ascend up to them in heaven. And we are preparing for the great company of God's people from every tongue, tribe, and nation. So it's probably good if we learn to start getting along now if we're going to be spending eternity with each other. It's probably a good idea that we start getting along now and keeping accounts short and showing hospitality and being kind and helping each other fight sin. And this is a dress rehearsal for eternity. It really is, and it counts forever. More on this.
I just want to put another weight on the balance of that song that you just quoted.
Okay. Don's pushing the other direction on a song that I just quoted.
I don't think that song alone destroyed the church, but Jesus did go to the garden alone to pray.
He did, yes.
And so, in that sense, there is times we need to go alone and pray.
Yes. Yeah, and that's totally fair.
That's what that song is addressing. It's not just all.
Yeah, no, that's fair. So Don's pushing back a little bit on I come to the garden alone and saying there are times for private prayer. Well, and I will admit, a lot of that pietistic revival music I actually enjoy because that's like the mother's milk of my grandparents and Sunday Request Show from CFRY. Like, I actually like that music, but I don't think overall it moves us in a healthy direction. And I get it. There's always a positive spin on some of those songs. Like, yeah, yep. No, and so no, that's not discrediting private prayer at all. That's just saying that the Christian life can be lived in solitude. That's what I'm pushing back against. But yeah, but no, Don is correct to push back. There are times for private prayer, obviously. I'm not pushing back on that. More on this, Lisa. The more. Right. Yes, yeah, and so even and I think that goes back to this thing about being called saints and being called holy and being called out is if we dedicate ourselves as people, as individual members of the church to private prayer and to actually fighting sin in our lives, that makes the whole church healthier, right? If there's 200 people committed to holiness, you're going to have a much healthier church than if you have a church of 240 of them are committed to personal holiness and prayer. You're going to have a very sick church then, right? Yeah, absolutely. That's true. This is a team effort. Yeah.
So I think the point what we're saying is you can't be a Christian by yourself.
That you can't.
You cannot.
I agree. You cannot be a Christian by yourself.
Place the one with the other.
That's right.
To have both. You can't just be corporate church. You have to have your individual part too.
Yep.
You can't just be the one.
That's right. Yeah. So that's exactly right. So Yannicka is just saying you cannot be an isolated Christian apart from the church. That doesn't work. But to just show up Sunday morning and be uncommitted to personal holiness or personal prayer, you're eroding the character of the corporate church, right? So yes, both. It is a both and. And my perception is we are coming off of probably 2 generations of de-emphasizing the church, right? Prioritizing the personal side in such a way that the church is seen like an auxiliary, right? So that's more what I push against because that's what I think more our problem is right now. But in church history, there have been plenty of times where people just think, well, I was born into such and such a country, I go to church, therefore I'm a Christian. False. That's not adequate to be a Christian. Just because you were born in a historically Christian nation and you're part of a national church and you actually show up doesn't make you a Christian. It's good to do those things, but that on its own is inadequate for sure. Right. So Dave is pointing out, and I think it's a fair analogy. Dave is making a comparison to the military. We glorify movies like Rambo, right? Where like one guy can take on an entire nation by himself and be successful. Spoiler alert, that doesn't actually work in real life. Okay. Rambo is not real life. Okay. An organized army can take out another army. That is true, but it's organized, right? And people are duty bound to each other, right? And there's serious consequences if you break rank from your platoon. That's costly not just to you, but to everyone. You're putting everyone at risk, right? So I think that's actually a very fair comparison, because one way to look at the church is it's a platoon, right? The church militant. This is a small army. This is, and we need to be moving in unison if we're going to make any headway. We have to be moving together. So I think that's a fair comparison as well. Harry. Right. So Harry's pointing out in the individualistic approach to the Christian faith is a pretty novel concept. Like the reformers, the church fathers, nobody would have thought in terms. Here's how it's been popularly portrayed. And tell me if you find resonance in this or not. The world is a sinking ship going to hell, right? Step one, we're all on board, right? The world's a sinking ship. It's all going to hell. Let's get 17 souls onto the life raft before it goes down. So there's like a real urgency to evangelism because we got to get souls on the life raft, right? To pick up another song from my grandparents' generation, there are souls to witness, there are souls to save, send the light. Right? It's not a bad song, but does anyone know that song? Or is that just me? My grandpa always played it on harmonica. Kind of makes me nostalgic, but whatever. If that's your view of the Christian life, then getting a few individual souls onto the life raft is the end goal. If the biblical story, however, is different, if the biblical story works this way, that through his son, God is slowly but surely recolonizing his entire creation that was corrupted. And he needs a corporate people, he needs a platoon, he needs an army to take back every last square inch that the serpent falsely took from our first parents. If that's the biblical story, now the corporate approach to the Christian life looks very different. It's not about getting souls on a life raft anymore. It's about telling people this all belongs to Jesus. Here's the terms of surrender, come quietly with us. Right? There's a whole different end game to what we're doing. And then in that framing, the church makes a lot more sense because now the church is a military platoon that is committed to taking back what was lost. We're winning back territory. So suddenly this whole corporate nature of things looks a lot different than the get some souls on the life raft because we're all going down. Right? There's a different story at play, and the stories we tell ourselves they definitely inform the way we approach life. So the way you cast the story of redemption and creation will play into this too, whether corporate approach or privatized approach makes more sense to the Christian faith. And the get on the life raft, it's all going down approach is a pretty new one. That's a pretty novel approach to the Christian story. Well, I'll stop there. More on this. This good discussion here so far. Angela. Okay, so Angela's asking about how, in light of this, how do we view crusade-style evangelism a la Billy Graham? I think you get a different answer if you're talking Billy Graham in 1950 or Billy Graham in the year 2000. There was a serious shift in emphasis because I think a lot of these itinerant evangelists, and let's be fair enough to say, in the 1950s, if you compare this to a football game, you're playing on the other team's 30-yard line. Like, you've got pretty good field position if you're an evangelist in 1950, because everyone grew up in Sunday school. Everyone grew up in church. They know the Bible. So we need to get them reacquainted with the faith they grew up with. So let's be fair. It's a different game in 1950 than it is today. But by later in his ministry, by his own admission, Billy Graham said, I was extremely unhappy with the fruit of my crusades. You get a bunch of decisions and you come back a year later and none of these people are in church. Nothing's changed, right? They just made maybe an emotional decision, right? Because, you know, the bus will wait for you and we're going to do Just As I Am one more time, and, you know. And I actually think Billy Graham is one of like the better kind of corporate evangelists that we've had. I'm not one to beat up on Billy Graham at all. But I think even by his own admission, he said, we realized probably midway through his ministry, we have to change the focus here. We can't go fill up a stadium in Los Angeles, get 40,000 decisions, and it makes no difference, right? So later, you saw a real emphasis in his ministry of partnering with local churches, that when the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association would come, there's 100 churches, 300 churches, whatever, that are ready, that are there, that are sending people there to do follow-up and get these people discipled into an actual church, right? Because the Lone Ranger approach doesn't work, right? Like, there's the old, it's a pretty popular sermon illustration where the preacher goes to go visit kind of an absent church member, and he's in his cabin heating himself by the fire, and the minister he doesn't say much, he just takes the tongs and he takes one coal out and puts it on the hearth. And that warm coal, by the end of their visit, is cold. And he just kind of pointed to that. That's what happens to Christians that are not in fellowship with other Christians. It's going to go cold. And so I think a definite improvement in the last number of years has been, we're recovering the importance of the local church again, and of actual fellowship and discipleship, not just a big blitz in a city and then you drive off into the sunset, but we need to partner with local churches, right? Which is going back to an older model. Because if you look at, let's say, like the Great Awakening era, so like Edwards, Whitfield, the Wesley brothers, there was large-scale evangelism happening then, but a real emphasis on the local church. Like, I think it was Clement, maybe Cyprian, said, you can't have God as your father without having the church as your mother. It's impossible. It's a package deal. Right? The older men understood that. Like, the point is, disciple your family, be in church. The churches here need to follow up. Whitfield's going back to England, but there's a local pastor here who's going to, or a local church that needs to take care of your soul and be discipled in. Because Whitfield couldn't follow up with everybody, right? He preached to 30,000 people sometimes without a microphone. You just can't physically follow up with all of that. More on this. Good discussion. Then let's keep going. After note 12 here. They willingly agree to live together according to Christ's instructions, giving themselves to the Lord and to one another by the will of God, with the stated purpose of following the ordinances of the gospel. And for that, who wants to take Acts 2:41 and 42? Sean's got that. Acts 5:13 and 14. Someone want to take that? Ray's got that. And then 2 Corinthians 9:13. Who wants to take that? Howard's got that. Okay. So let's go Acts 2:41 and 42. Okay, very good. So you see there, what Sean just read, Is 3,000 souls being saved at one event, could we fairly call that mass evangelism? I'd say yes, that's mass evangelism. And then the disciples took off and said, you're on your own now, right? No, what's the model here? 42, they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and the fellowship, the breaking of bread and the prayers. That sounds like corporate worship, doesn't it? Okay, they got integrated into the life of the church. And also, it says here, in 41, they received the word and were baptized. Okay, so baptism is that step of obedience. But then the next phrase is interesting. There were added that day about 3,000 souls. Added to what? Okay, and there was 3,000 unrestricted free agents walking around after that. That's not what it says. There were added that day 3,000 souls to the church. Okay, this is a healthy model. Yes, this is not against mass evangelism at all, but the point is to get them from verse 41 into verse 42. That's the biblical model here, is to take part in the corporate life of God's people. The teaching, the fellowship, the breaking of bread, and the prayers. That's the end goal. Well, let's go through all these texts and we can open it up again. Acts 5, 13 and 14. Okay, go for it. Okay, so again, the picture is they're taking part, they're together, they're in community. Okay, the people held them in high esteem, so forth. And then they were added to the Lord, again, multitudes. And then lastly, 2 Corinthians 9:13.
By their approval of this service, they will glorify God because of your submission that comes from your confession of the gospel of Christ, and the generosity of your contribution for them and for all others.
Okay. So again, these people, they're confessing the gospel, so evangelism, salvation. Okay. But then they're generous, contribution for them and for all the others. So again, there's a picture of taking part in the life of the people of God. So there's an emphasis on not neglecting the corporate embodied life of God's people, of the church. Discussion on this. I think it's basically the same picture. Inga. Oh, you're going back to Acts. Okay. Yep. Well, I think that's, okay, so they're at Solomon's portico. So this is the place where you go and debate philosophy if you're a good Greek, right? So this would be like, let's compare this to someone goes and does evangelism at the legislature building in Winnipeg or at the Parliament buildings in Ottawa. So you're doing public evangelism clearly in the public square. That's what Solomon's portico is. I think by experience, we probably know people that have a certain respect for Christians, but it's not like I'm going to become one. Right? Have you ever experienced that? I like what I see. I like the stability. I like the work ethic. I like the marriages. I like the obedient children. I like the community. I like all that. But boy, it's not for me. Okay? I like the fruit, but I refuse to plug into the root. I think there's maybe less of that now. Probably in an age where Christianization is more common, I think that this is a more common problem, right? Where people, they like what they see, but they just don't want to bend the knee themselves. But they'd like it if like 80% of their community was Christian, because then your kids can go for a walk by themselves and you can leave your car unlocked. They like that. Okay, and actually in some ways we're seeing some of this now. There is he's an Englishman. Is it Jeremy Carl? Carl Benjamin, there we go. I always get those two mixed up. Kind of like a politically conservative commentator who hates the way England is absolutely being annihilated. Like England is just turned inside out in every way possible. And he hates what he sees, and he's sad that the churches are empty. And then it hit him. I remember these old Anglican hymns because I grew up in the Church of England. I love it when the pipe organ gets fired up. I love going to Christmas and singing these familiar songs. And they said, I look at my kids and this means nothing to them. They have no memory of this because I never took them to church. Maybe I can't complain about Islam destroying my country if I'm not even a Christian. And by his own admission, he's not a Christian. But he's getting his family to church every week because he sees that as his duty as an Englishman. So he's not there yet, but he's getting close. He's seeing there is no England apart from Christianity. It will self-destruct. It is self-destructing. Same goes for Canada. Same goes for Germany. Same goes for France, whatever. So there's a certain respect for what Christianity built. But until or unless that man is regenerate, he's just going to admire it from afar without actually stepping into the full blessings of this. And I've never done a deep dive on this verse itself, but this is the way I've always read it. There's a certain kind of person who likes what they see what it builds, they see what it's capable of, but they just don't want to repent of their sins and become a believer themselves. They just want the cultural capital that it's capable of creating. Howard. Yeah. 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 Right, so Howard is just mentioning Sam Harris. So like 15 years ago, the rise of the new atheism, there was kind of the horsemen of the new atheism was Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, and Sam Harris. Were kind of the face of this new atheism. And Howard is just pointing out, Sam Harris said, I don't want to be a Christian. In fact, I'm going to spend my life opposing Christianity, but I do want my accountant to be a Christian so he won't steal from me. Which is kind of interesting logic, isn't it? Richard Dawkins, now same thing. He's an angry old man. He's not a very likable person. But he looks at Islam and the way it's destroying England, and he says, this has to stop. Maybe I'm a cultural Christian. I want the Church of England to ring out bells every Sunday morning. I want to hear the Church of England bells. But I hate Christianity. But it built this, and Islam can't do that. Islam can destroy this, but it can't build this. Christianity could. So I like it for that reason. I still hate the gospel. I just like what Christianity has built. And very tellingly, if you want to watch the real life evangelism, real life apologetics, when Christopher Hitchens was still alive, he did a university debate tour with Douglas Wilson. There's a documentary on it called Collision. You can get it at lots of places. It's on the Canon app. But they toured university campuses debating the question, is religion good for the world? And the camera followed them into a taxi cab and stuff. And Christopher Hitchens died shortly thereafter from cancer. But Douglas Wilson asked him in the back of the cab, he said, if we were down to one Christian that was left on earth, so there's just one Christian left, and you had your chance to wipe Christianity off the face of the earth forever, would you do it? And you could tell Hitchens was like actually sad. And he said, no, I wouldn't. And then Wilson said, why? I don't know, I just wouldn't. What is that? Christopher Hitchens knows he got oodles and oodles and oodles of Christian capital from being an Englishman. 1,000 years of capital that he has enjoyed all the blessings of. Deep down he knows, I better not destroy this if I had a chance. And yet there's something in him that just hates it. It's an interesting thing. How people, and maybe in our experience, we can see some people where you see that push and that pull in the same person. They love it and they hate it. Right? I've had some relatives that I'm convinced our home has been a magnet and a repellent for them both. Like they like what they see, and they just hate it with everything that they have, and they keep coming back because they keep liking to see a mom and a dad raise their kids on a farm and go to church. And they hate it because I'm literally a patriarch. Okay? What I don't know what goes on in a soul like that. I really don't. I've never experienced that, but I've seen enough of it. I think it's a real thing. That you love something that you simultaneously hate and fight with everything in you, and yet it's warm and it is inviting at the same exact moment. I'll turn it back here. Has anyone experienced something like that too, where it's a push and a pull? Pete? Yeah, there's a biblical example of Agrippa, right? Sounds good, but I'm not there. Yep. Yep. Almost. Almost. Yep. More on this. Harry. Right. Right, and I think that's a fair point. So Harry's pointing out, if I'm understanding correctly, when God intervenes in history in a dramatic way, like he did with Ananias and Sapphira, let's say, like during the Acts, there's all kinds of weird things happening. If you're a witness to that, it's both terrifying and a draw, both, right? Yeah, I think so. So Harry's just mentioning that when God's working in history in a very drastic way, people's reactions to that get polarized. Right? Like Jonathan Edwards could come back and preach sinners in the hands of an angry God right now, and it might have no impact. Because it wasn't actually the sermon where the power was. God just said, we're doing a great awakening throughout New England. And in his providence, he used that sermon together with some other very gifted preachers like the Wesleys and Whitfield to do something. But those same men could come back to Chicago today and it wouldn't make, right? Because the power's not in men, it's just God's doing something. And if you are a witness to God doing something drastic, it just intensifies whatever your emotions are, right? Prime example, this is a small scale that I remember, this is maybe 15 years ago. The liberal Lutheran denomination they had their annual meeting in Minneapolis. And as they voted to legitimize same-sex unions, as that vote happened, a lightning bolt hit the church and knocked the steeple over and the cross burnt. And John Piper noticed that this happened. And he wrote an article noticing that this happened. Like this is a warning for you people. God has left the evangelical Lutheran Church. And he did it in a pretty drastic way so that nobody can claim ignorance here. And some people took well to that, and some people, their love for John Piper did not grow when he said that. Well, it's just nature, it's just the, right? But I think the more drastically God is operating, the more polarized the response will be. Right? The opposition, so let's say Whitfield, probably, I would say, in my opinion, possibly the most gifted evangelist in church history, top 5 for sure, responsible for tons of good work in England and here in North America, and people would bang drums and throw dead cats and yell over him while he was preaching. We remember Happy Whitfield, because that's the story of the fruit of his work. But to be Whitfield was not a happy thing. because people, hecklers, are there tossing stuff and playing drums and yelling and trying to disperse the crowd. Right? Spurgeon's depression was instigated by somebody. They just built this beautiful new church that could hold like 3,000 people, and somebody yelled fire, and there was such a stampede, a bunch of people got trampled and died. And emotionally, Spurgeon never ever got over that. He lived with depression for the rest of his life. We memorialize these guys as heroes because they were, but it wasn't actually fun to be them, because it just garners a polarizing response. And we have to remember that too when we remember our heroes. Part of the reason they're heroes is because it was not fun being them. It was very difficult to be them. It was very polarizing. And again, as is often pointed out, Jesus points it out too, sometimes the institution that have their founder's name on it would excommunicate that founder. Right? Like any United or liberal Presbyterian church that has the name Knox on it would excommunicate John Knox for his outrageous doctrine. A lot of Lutheran churches would excommunicate Luther. A lot of seminaries and Bible colleges with Calvin's name would excommunicate Calvin. Right? It's not just a thrill being these people. It's tough. They pay a cost. And to bring it back here, I think that's what's in verse 13. Back to Inga's point. It's polarizing. And some people like what they see, but they're just not ready to step through that door. And it's very frustrating. If you see what's on the other side of that door for them is peace and harmony, and they just refuse, it's tough. But we can't force that on another person. The Spirit must do that. But I've got 10:18 here, so we should close in prayer and then have time for coffee and visiting before worship. Father God, thank you for today. Thank you for calling your church together. Thank you for the community that you are building right here in our midst. Lord, we want to thank you for each one that we have gotten to know and that we can worship shoulder to shoulder with and enjoy company and fellowship with. And Lord, I pray even this morning you would bind us together as we worship together as one corporate body in spirit and in truth. That you would, through your Spirit, that you would feed us this morning. That you would be given all the glory and honor and praise that you are rightfully owner of. Lord, and I pray that we would do that with glad hearts, with submissive hearts, and that you would feed us here. Strengthen us this morning, and help us to be mindful of the name that we carry around as Christians, that whatever we do is a reflection on you, on your people in the local church, and on your people across the world. Lord, I pray that we would be mindful of our actions, and that we would make your name famous for the right reasons as we conduct ourselves around a watching world. Pray that you'd be with us now, Lord. Feed us, nourish us, and we pray this all in the strong name of Jesus, and amen.